What is Oil and Honey? It is the autobiography of the author Bill McKibben, detailing his work as a beekeeper and work as an environmental activist. It is his 14th published book, and it was published in 2013. My background knowledge regarding Oil and Honey. I only knew about this book and about Bill McKibben, the author, from the initial book review I watched to decide what to read for the class. Oil and Honey is a very interesting and grabbing title, though I didn't really know what to get out of it. Oil and honey are two different things. um, though the one thing that I think did get my attention more than oil and honey was the subheading education of an unlikely activist. Usually I don't think of um, unlikely and activist going in the same sentence together. I've always wanted to get more into activism myself, whether that be climate or racial or gender inequality, and I saw this book as good insight. I always hear about activism around climate change and others, but I never really know the process behind trying to make a movement such as McKibben does. What I liked about the book: not only learning about the world of climate activism, but about beekeeping and how to McKibben it relates to his work as an environmental activist. The book, being an autobiography and real story about Bill McKibben's journey, makes it more engaging than I thought it would be when initially starting to read it. The book could have just been about Bill McKibben's experience with activism in the Keystone XL pipeline, but instead he decided to add even more into its story, into his own story, by including how beekeeping had an impact on all of it. It also has consequences, real world consequences, such as Bill McKibben being arrested for his activism. Today I'm always hearing about people being arrested during movements while taking action. Just as it happened back during his demonstration, it still happens today. And the story is relatable. Instead of Bill McKibben just telling about his activism, he also explains that he misses his home because he's traveling so much because of it around the country. You really try to empathize or just sympathize with him. I've missed my home, but I haven't been around the world trying to in an activist movement. Climate change is something that affects everyone. Since we are all living on the same planet, McKibben's story is an eye-opener into the world of climate activism. Even though he worked as a beekeeper, McKibben is afraid of bee stings, which I am as well, that he explains on page 208. The message of the book. Bill McKibben is telling his story to encourage others to take a stand for things that they believe in and or like, such as him believing in his planet and the climate and environmental activism movement. Basically, if he can do it, so can you and I. He wants to gain awareness for things like exceeding a certain carbon emission in the atmosphere, which would be 350 parts per million, which will cause devastating effects to the planet if not prevented. Governments like the United States government, and more specifically Congress, are not doing it nearly enough to prevent further damage to the planet, which Bill McKibben goes into in the book and his frustrations. Importance of the story today. As long as the planet and its resources are being used in a harmful way, there will always be an avenue for activism. And the Keystone XL pipeline featured in the book, and as a center point of Bill McKibben's activism and protest, has been as relevant to as recent as this year, 2021. It was restarted back in 2017 and eventually being officially terminated in June 2021. We hear stories of young people spearheading climate activism movements, such as Greta Thunberg, who spoke out for climate at the 2019 United Nations Climate Action Summit. The struggle to do something about climate change is an ever ongoing process, and it feels like sometimes it's one step forward, two steps back, and that is illustrated by Bill McKibben's frustration with the Keystone XL pipeline. Importance of oil and honey on the class. It is very important in a class such as environmental science, where we learn about our carbon footprints in labs and history of activism through our lectures and readings, as well as how our planet works and how we try to make ourselves self-sustainable and just relying on harmful things like fossil fuels that will damage and make our planet unlivable in years to come. But oil and honey leans into that social and political real-life aspects of these problems, more so than I think I could get in a class. And I've also picked up on some things from the book that I had learned about previously from class, such as Bill McKibben talking about the Sierra Club, which was founded by John Muir, a UW-Madison alumni, where on page 63 he talks to the director of the Sierra Club at the time, Michael Brune. Who should I recommend this book to? Anyone who is not only interested in the world of climate activism but also beekeeping. I'm not the only person who is interested in activism, not by far. Oil and honey gives insight into that world and could give insight into a wider audience, such as people who myself who want to get into it but don't really know how or just how it's done in general. Beekeeping also. Beekeeping is related to the world of climate activism that I learned through this book. Even those who aren't as interested in bees could gain a new perspective through Bill McKibben. I recommend the book to those who may not even be that interested in the world of climate activism or activism in general. I really think that it could change someone's perspective. Overall, I think the book is really intriguing, and it gives me more insight into climate activism, and not just climate activism, but activism in general, and how much work is being put into change and change people's minds, not only people's minds, but also governments' minds, like the U.S. Congress, and I find that very interesting.